We are super excited to be joined today by um, Liz Turner, Stephanie Zhu, Tobias Fox, Anna McHugh for our presenters today for this April Lunch and Learn, and I'll turn it over to Anna now to take us through.
Everyone. Thank you guys for joining us today. My name is Anna McHugh. I'm a sophomore at Rutgers University, New Brunswick, and I'm also an intern here at the New Jersey Food Democracy Collaborative. So we'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, Liz Turner, who's going to be discussing urban agriculture zoning, model ordinances, and more from her resource guide. Liz Turner is a food and agriculture fellow at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law and Graduate School, where she leads research on local and regional food system policy with a particular emphasis on urban agriculture policies. Liz also provides legal, technical assistance to food system organizations on land access, zoning, and land use matters. For law school, Liz spent more than a decade working in the food system, including as a farmhand, a line cook, and many roles in the specialty coffee industry, from barista to roaster to marketer. She holds a BA in comparative literature and film studies from Haverford College and a JD from Harvard Law School. After Liz's discussion, we will be joined by Tobias Fox, who's a founder and managing director at the Newark Science and Sustainability.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Anna, for that great introduction. As she said,
So Liz, you have some slides you're going to share, correct?
Yes, I know.
Yeah, I'll just run through the program really quick, Stephanie, if you want to share one more time, just so folks have a lay of the land for today's Lunch and Learn, and then we can switch over to Liz's slides. Yeah, so Liz is going to present for about 30-ish minutes. I know it says a little bit longer there, but I'm just padding things a bit. So Liz is going to present for about 30 minutes. We'll have a quick Q&A, and then Tobias is going to sort of riff off of, discuss, kick off our conversation essentially with his own commentary in response to Liz's presentation, and then also just like talking about his experience being an urban farmer in New Jersey's biggest city, or one of New Jersey's biggest cities. I think I should probably know whether Jersey City is bigger than Newark or not, but I'm sure Tobias and many others in the chat will correct me immediately if I misspoke. And then we'll have a facilitated discussion between Liz and Tobias, as well as following up by an overview of NJFDC's Urban Ag Policy Project with Stephanie and Anna, who are leading that project. And then we'll wrap up. And as you can tell, the session is being recorded for anyone who cannot join, or if you want to watch it later, and it will be available later on our website and on our YouTube channel. Okay, so now we can switch gears over to Liz's talk. And if you're just joining now, please continue to just say hey in the chat, letting us know where you're joining from, any affiliations you want to share. Thanks.
All right. Let's try this again. Hi, everyone. Okay. Can everyone see that? Okay. So thanks everyone for the introduction. As Anna and Janine mentioned, I'm going to be talking about zoning for urban agriculture. My title is Food and Agriculture Fellow at the Center for Agriculture and Food Systems at Vermont Law and Graduate School. I'm an attorney. The fellowship is mostly related to my role as sort of a researcher and writer. Just a little bit about CAFS. So CAFS is a little research-based institution. It's basically its own nonprofit housed at Vermont Law and Graduate School. So we work on original scholarly research in lots of different areas of food and agriculture law and policy. We work across the spectrum from super local institutions to international partners. We have people on staff who address a lot of different types of policy and legal concerns within the food system. Some of them are listed here. And then we also do a little bit of sort of legal technical assistance for local food system organizations. Within all of that work, we work with law and policy students that attend the law and graduate school. And so they work with us as research assistants and sort of co-professionals on a lot of this work. And we're, hoping to train them to go on and become useful food and policy professionals throughout the country and the world. So hopefully if you have a Vermont Law and Graduate School alumnus in your life, you can bear witness to that. My current sort of main project as a fellow is what's called the Local and Regional Food Systems Clearinghouse, focused right now on urban agriculture and innovative production. It's a cooperative agreement with the USDA Office of Urban Agriculture and Innovative Production, which has been going on since August of 2023 and is carrying on to this day. It fulfills a part of OUAIP's statutory mandate from the 2018 Farm Bill. The director was delegated the authority to identify common state and municipal best practices for navigating local policies. That line of the Farm Bill was basically passed along to us in this cooperative agreement, so we're helping fulfill that mandate on behalf of the office. Our agreement with them outlines a local and regional policy food systems policy clearinghouse, which is a mouthful that we're trying to figure out how to say in a fewer amount of words. It's going to turn into a largely web-based information center of sorts on all sorts of different local food system topics. But our first big chunk of research is all on urban agriculture and innovative production. The research that we're doing focuses on the 17 cities that the USDA originally identified as urban agriculture hubs. Those are on the map here. None in New Jersey, although 2 close by. So we're looking at what the policies are that these cities have on the books. We're talking to folks who work in these cities about how those policies play out on the ground. And then we're working with an advisory group of urban ag professionals and policymakers from across the country to help us kind of shape that research into useful resources. So we're hoping to start rolling out resources this summer. I've been writing like a maniac, but keep an eye out for those. The policy deliverables will eventually be, as I said, the sort of information center, which will include a searchable policy database, which is modeled on a previous project that we've worked on called the Healthy Food Policy Project. Some of the resources will include the sort of 101 overview of major local government topics related to urban agriculture, and then shorter fact sheets and case studies that will highlight specific examples of those policies in action. And then we'll also be doing more of these kind of live presentations and webinars at conferences and those kind of things. So again, just keep an eye out for that stuff all rolling out starting this summer. What I'm here to talk to you about today is an earlier resource that we created as part of the Healthy Food Policy Project. So I think it was originally created in 2018 or 2019 and then updated last year by myself and a co-author named Jess Phelps. It's an overview of common zoning issues impacting urban farmers and gardeners. It offers tips on how to create better policy, and it also offers examples of what some cities have done or how some cities have written ordinances to account for these kind of urban agriculture uses. I'm going to give a pretty high level overview of what's in the report today, or what's in the guide today, just sort of the top level concerns. I would encourage you, and I can drop it in the chat later, perhaps someone else can now, to go look through that resource and find those helpful specific examples. The policy database that's attached to this website also has some useful examples of urban agriculture ordinances. Our first step in figuring out how to write about this stuff was defining what urban agriculture is. So the USDA has described it, although not officially defined it, as the cultivation, processing, and distribution of agricultural products in urban and suburban areas. So as I'm sure you all are familiar, New Jersey is a diverse state in terms of the types of cities and towns that are there. it can look a lot of different ways in different places. So just these three examples are meant to be illustrative of that. This top left is a 7-acre urban farm in Detroit, which I was privileged to visit last summer. That's sort of carved out of formerly residential lots in a residential neighborhood in a part of the city where a lot of folks moved out over the course of the 20th century, as I'm sure many folks are aware, is sort of Detroit is famous for. The top right is a farm in Albuquerque, which is on land south of the city that has been in agricultural production for centuries and remains so today. There are sort of full-scale commodity alfalfa farms on this land. You can have, hundreds of acres. So still within a city, still agriculture, but a lot different from the farm in Detroit. Or the bottom is a community garden in Oakland, which looks familiar, I'm sure, to a lot of you as this kind of collectively tended community garden space, which is mostly folks growing food for personal use or to share with their neighbors, or a food bank, or those kinds of things. So urban agriculture can look a lot of different ways. This is my nod to the locals. This is a zoning map of Jersey City. Zoning, which we're going to talk more all about today, is just a way that cities sort of divide up their land base and designate what uses are allowed within those different areas of the city. In most cities, those categories are loosely residential, commercial, and industrial. Some towns or cities that still have agricultural land will have an agricultural use category as well. And then within those categories, there will often be subcategories. So single-family residential, multifamily residential, light industrial, heavy industrial, those kinds of things. A city's ability to zone or authority to zone comes from its home rule authority, which is delegated from the state legislature. In New Jersey, that's explicitly delegated by the municipal land use law, but it's the state offering the city, saying to the city, you basically have control over this. So in this country, there's some like federal and state level land use control, but it almost all happens at the local level by a city or town government. A little history on zoning. My apologies, I'm a real legal history nerd. So the basis of zoning started in the early part of the 20th century as a land use control practice. This is Herbert Hoover, who was the president, but before that, he was the Secretary of Commerce, and he got together a federal advisory committee to create what is called the Standard Zoning Enabling Act, which was promulgated to state governments. Most state governments still have zoning enabling acts based on the SZEA, and the SZEA delegates the majority of land use control to local governments. Zoning was further upheld as a legal limitation on private property rights by a 1926 Supreme Court case called Village of Euclid versus Ambler Realty Company. It's still the sort of like dominant case on zoning. And it sort of said, it answers the question like, why does the city get to tell me what to do with my land, basically? And the traditional separation of use zoning that I was describing earlier is now called Euclidean after this case. You'll sometimes see it referred to that way. There are other more sort of like modern or progressive styles of zoning. Form-based code is something that cities are starting to adopt, which is more focused on sort of the character of neighborhoods and wanting to preserve the character of neighborhoods. A lot of it is focused on walkability, density, encouraging those kinds of sort of like softer or like squishier benefits of a neighborhood or maintaining the character of a neighborhood. But most cities still use this kind of like separation of use zoning. Zoning and planning are two things that are related but not the same. So I find that it's useful to sort of separate them. So zoning codes are generally created in accordance with the comprehensive plan. That's language from the SZEA. And comprehensive plans are forward-looking documents which identify goals and objectives for a city's development. They're usually put together by a city's planning board, whereas the zoning code is administered by a zoning board. And they're usually updated in some kind of regular cadence. So Atlantic City is taking us back to the delights of September 2008, and its beautiful graphic design ways. most cities do this in pretty long time scale. So they'll do it every 20 years, 25 years, 10 years, 50 years. But they identify their own sort of cadence for how often they want to update their plans. And then once the plans are created, usually through a big public input process, and they go through a lot of drafts and rounds of revision, the city council sort of turns those objectives into enforceable zoning ordinances. So, what's in a plan is just sort of what a city wants to happen, and then the zoning ordinances are a city saying like, no, these are the laws that you're actually bound by when you're trying to use land within our boundaries. As urban agriculture and community gardening have gotten a little bit more widespread and gained greater acceptance over the years, cities have started making more efforts to include urban agriculture specifically in zoning codes and other land use policies, as well as in their plans. So your neighbors to the west, Philadelphia, have created an urban agriculture specific plan, but a lot of cities have some sort of food systems component that includes urban agriculture uses, or a climate or sustainability component that includes urban agriculture uses. And then cities use those kind of like goals from within those plans to create specific enforceable policies. Okay. That is sort of the background section, and now I'm going to get a little bit more into the resource and sort of the tips within the resource. And I'm hoping that we'll have a lot of opportunity to talk about specific examples later on in the facilitated discussion and answer any questions that come up. So this is just kind of going to give a high level overview of what's included in this resource, and then we can talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty later. The first and biggest tip is to clarify what agriculture is. So a lot of the action in all different kinds of law, but especially in zoning, happens in the definition section, which you might just breeze through. But if you look at a zoning ordinance, it might have a table that says, beekeeping is allowed in single-family residential, multifamily residential, whatever, like all the different zones. It'll be like checked off. And then to figure out what beekeeping actually means, you have to go to the definition section of the zoning code to see what that means. It might mean keep as many bees as you want. It probably doesn't. It probably says something like you can keep up to 6 beehives on a lot that's this big. If you have this many additional square feet in your lot, you can have this many additional beehives. But almost in many places, that sort of very useful and actionable information is tucked away in the definition section of a zoning code. So this is if you're navigating your way through a zoning code for the first time, or if you're working to create one, whichever side of the equation you're on, it's really good to pay attention. It's really important to pay attention to the definition section. The second big bucket of tips is to clarify where agriculture is permitted. So this usually means what zones it's permitted in. As I alluded to earlier, in traditional zoning, usually, the zoning districts are defined by their sort of predominant character, whether that's single-family residential, multifamily residential, industrial, commercial. There's almost always a special level of sort of concern and restriction on use in single-family residential zones that dates all the way back to that Supreme Court decision in Euclid, which was about whether or not you could build apartment buildings in single-family residential zones. So single-family residential zoning is almost always really protective and really restrictive in terms of what it allows. It sort of like goes up from there. So you'll often see zoning codes that say like everything that's allowed in single-family residential plus these other uses, and then sort of like building up from there to industrial zones, which are usually the most sort of do whatever you want, devil may care. Build a garbage dump your chemicals here, like do all these things that are you know, you wouldn't want happening next to a house or a school or whatever. The other thing about specifying what zones agriculture is permitted in is that usually it can be permitted in one of two ways. What's called permitted use, which is, or by right use, which is means that you're just allowed to do it. You don't need to get a special permit or any kind of special permission. And most, like, think about planting a vegetable garden. Most cities, not all, but most cities aren't going to give you a lot of trouble if you just plant a small personal use vegetable garden in your backyard. If you want to move a bunch of chickens into your yard, or you want to start selling stuff off your property, you might need to apply for some kind of special permit from the city. Just these uses that might have a higher level of nuisance to your neighbors, or public health concerns, those kinds of things. Often a city will impose some kind of permit requirement, and usually that's called a special use permit or some other kind of something language like that. The next big bucket of sort of thinking what you want to think about is what agriculture is permitted. Obviously, there are a lot of different types of activities that fall under that big umbrella of agriculture. So these uses can include something as simple as cultivating plants to a height greater than a standard lawn, which is where a lot of cities limit their they have ordinances around like how tall plants can be in a yard. Things like animal husbandry. Chickens are definitely the most common permitted animal to be kept in a city. Goats, pigs, cows, horses are sometimes also included in zoning codes, or other poultry or fowl like ducks and turkeys. Bees often have a special kind of set of ordinances because of the risk of stinging, those kinds of things. So some cities, for example, make you go around and give notice to all your neighbors that you're going to start keeping bees in your backyard for those reasons. Accessory structures is also a big hot button issue. Greenhouses, hoop houses, and other kind of season extension structures, farm stands, like storage sheds, shipping containers, all different kinds of things that a farm might incorporate into its operation. Each of those might have a different set of requirements it might need to meet to be installed on a specific site, depending on what the zoning says. On-site sales or other commercial uses is another big issue. A lot of cities more strictly regulate on-site sales than non-commercial community gardening or personal gardening. So things like CSA pickup sites, farm stand sales, those kinds of things are often regulated separately. Composting is another thing that often has a specific set of concerns around odor, pests, those kinds of things. So there are often specific requirements about keeping the compost contained in a specific way, keeping it further away from property lines, screening it from neighbors through various means, those kinds of concerns or restrictions. And then innovative production uses. We're starting to see this more and more as techniques like aquaponics or container farming become more popular. The zoning codes just don't really account for those. They don't really haven't really considered them as a potential land use, but as they're getting more popular, it's something that policymakers are starting to think about more and more. And then clarify how agriculture is permitted. So as I alluded to earlier, a lot of the big concerns sort of fall under this bucket of nuisance. So things like odor, noise, traffic, basically anything you think of that might bother a neighbor. So often things that fall into this are compost, machinery, especially, like think about mowers or tractors, things that make noise. They restrict hours of operation, whether that's, you can't use powered machinery during certain hours, or you can't have your on-site farm stand open certain hours. A lot of cities ban roosters or other animals that make a lot of noise from being kept within specific zones. And then, as I mentioned earlier, process is another sort of thing that needs to be considered. So some cities require some kind of special permit or license to establish an urban farm, especially if it includes some of these more potentially controversial uses. Some cities require insurance or soil testing, especially if folks are going to sell vegetables that come out of the farm. And some cities require what's called a certificate of occupancy. That's usually for a vacant lot where there isn't like a house or something else that's sort of established a use already. That just is like a way of sort of registering with the city to say, hey, we're here and we're doing this thing, and now you sort of know about it. Outside the zoning code, there are a lot of other policy-making concerns that are related, but not necessarily zoning specific. Code enforcement is often like a separate municipal unit than zoning and planning. So one body makes the zoning code, the other body enforces it. And they, I'm learning, do not generally talk to each other very clearly or frequently. So a new zoning ordinance can be passed, and then the code enforcement folks aren't aware of what that means in terms of what they should be looking out for. So a neighbor might call and say, hey, the lot next to me is looking really overgrown. I think it's violating the, blight code in our city's zoning code. Will you like come take a look? And then the person who owns that lot will get a ticket. But sometimes what looks overgrown to a neighbor might just be that a farmer is cover cropping or hasn't gotten a chance to weed in a while in the height of summer. So we're seeing a few cities where they're either reforming their code enforcement policies or doing a little bit more training of code enforcement officers to make it clear what isn't sort of allowed under the city's code, and when code enforcement officers should actually be issuing tickets versus taking a look and saying, hey, this looks like this farmer maybe is doing this on purpose or is here a lot, but just hasn't gotten a chance to weed the section of the farm that's closest to the street, and so we're not gonna bother writing them a ticket today. Water access is another huge issue. Most urban farms need to connect to municipal water supply, and that can happen in some cities through giving them access to a fire hydrant or offering special rates for irrigation as opposed to residential use, giving them stormwater credits because they're not, the farm is serving as a sink for stormwater and not, directing more stormwater into the storm drains. Land access, another huge concern, obviously, for farmers of all kinds, but urban farmers in specific. The two things that you need to grow food that a city has any control over are water and land. And so a lot of cities where they have a lot of vacant land are developing programs to connect farmers with that land as a way of encouraging this kind of beneficial use of the land, not just for food production, but also urban agriculture has been shown to have a lot of other positive community benefits. And then the other thing to think about is municipal support for urban agriculture. So we've heard from folks on both sides of the coin about how important it is to have someone within city government who is sort of at least a point of contact for urban farmers and gardeners, if not sort of a policy advisor or a policy creator around urban agriculture within city government. So that's another thing to consider as cities are working on building support for urban agriculture in the zoning code. There's other things that are needed. And that is my super speedy top line overview. As I said, I'm hoping we can get to more examples and nitty-gritty in the conversation, but just wanted to give folks an idea of the types of things that we'd be talking about. This is my contact information, which I can also share in the chat, but I'm always interested in hearing from others in the space about what's going on in their city, and happy to offer support and help if I can.
Thank you very much, Liz. We have time for like just maybe one or two quick questions before Tobias talks about, based on Liz's presentation and overview of the topic, like what's kind of the vantage point from one, one city in New Jersey, that being Newark, where Tobias's organization is based. So in the chat, if you want to put, when you open up the chat, you can select either the questions going to the host and panelists or the questions going to everyone. I think just making your question select everyone so everyone can see what you're asking. And Liz obviously can also see it. And then we'll take just like one or two for now, and then there'll be more discussion after Tobias has a chance to chime in. So does anybody have a question? And Anna, Stephanie, feel free, to be asking questions as well. But anything that Liz presented on related to, I guess, zoning and code enforcement in particular, but anything, and then we can. You could always just unmute. It's a small group if you prefer, or I'm not sure if you can do that actually. Maybe you have to raise your hand and I can unmute you. No questions.
So I actually have a question.
Yeah.
So I was gonna ask Liz, what do you think is really holding like cities back from kind of implementing like specific zoning and codes regarding urban agriculture into their like municipal code?
It's a good question, and I think it really depends on the city. But I think that in the cities that we've seen that have the most robust sort of like code written about urban agriculture, it's also the cities that have the most robust kind of community organizing around urban agriculture issues. So city governments usually, I don't want to say always, are responding to what their constituents are asking for. And so folks need to, looking at examples like Philly and Detroit and Boston, it took a lot of work from community members to show up and say like, hey, we're either we're running urban farms or we're interested in starting urban farms and we don't know whether that's possible or what's actually allowed, because a lot of city zoning just hasn't been updated in a long time. And so, it's as I said, it's sort of only in the last like 20 or 30 years that cities have really started thinking about, oh, right, people, we used to think, or there was a time where we sort of like banished farming to the more rural areas, and now we're starting to see a greater interest in people growing food in cities, and how do we sort of accommodate that through zoning code. I saw an example of urban right to farm, about urban right to farm. No, the short answer is no. That's something I'm interested in also, because obviously there are cities in right to farm states. For anyone who's not aware, right to farm law is usually a law that protects farmers from certain kinds of like nuisance lawsuits. And I'm not sure, right, New Jersey's a right to farm state. I'm not sure if that's because zoning sort of restricts most uses that would be the subject of a lawsuit like that. Like, you're not going to be able to start like a hog CAFO in the middle in like downtown Trenton or whatever. Or if it's just that those uses get kind of regulated other ways. But actually, the student who's working with me on the project right now has a special interest in this exact question and did a research project on it, and wasn't really able to find many examples of right to farm being invoked as a protection for urban agriculture. So,
and Liz, I can unmute Meredith because she's a Rutgers, a researcher at Rutgers in urban ag, and I'm sure she can expand on what she's asking about here. So if you just give me a second, I can do that.
yeah, but
if you want, Meredith, you don't have to, but I think you go ahead.
Why I asked was because obviously we're not like a state that has much in the way of CAFO anyway, right? Like we have small, family-ish farms, but I'm thinking about it more in terms of like the structure issue, the kinds of needs that urban farmers have, where they'll let you put up the pipe, but they won't let you put plastic over it.
Right.
They'll let you grow in the ground, but every single thing has to have a box around it, as if the roots don't grow out from underneath the box. Like kind of like crazy things that people who don't grow things you clearly don't understand. And so when I think of right to farm, I think of it more as a way of encapsulating the practices of urban farms and then protecting those. I get the CAFO stuff and the really big ag things and why you have them in rural communities, but I can see across the landscape of New Jersey that because every single town and city is different, you're going to have all this unevenness in what farmers could potentially be allowed to do if you can't protect certain basic practices like the right to set up a high tunnel, the right to cover the high tunnel, you know what I mean? The right to have a mower, like it's just, or chickens or whatever. I don't know. That's why I was asking about like maybe someplace like Vermont, which is really progressive, or California, where like Burlington, example, with the intervale there. You know, what are they doing in terms of like creating a little bit of a demo around right to farm for urban places?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will tell you that we haven't come across a specific like urban right to farm statute. I would also caution you against thinking of Burlington as a city. I don't know if you've had a chance to come up and visit, but the Intervale is in this really rural feeling. I mean, Burlington itself is quite small, and so Vermont's not a great laboratory for or any kind of urban urban concern. California maybe. But yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. It's not something that has, as far as I know, been enacted anywhere. But I think that there is like room for that kind of state level legislation that kind of level sets for all municipalities that says, no, you can't say, you know, you can't have a plastic covered hoop house or whatever.
Like, for example, state legislation could say if your city is considering or enacting zoning for urban agriculture, like it could provide guidance. Like it should include allowances for water access and structures, but it can't, because of home rule, it can't require cities to create that zoning. I mean, even through our master planning process and our state planning process, it couldn't do that. But I'm not asking, I'm saying like they wouldn't be able to require that. I mean, but there could be guidance put out that this is what a zoning but that's what the document that your center provided, that's what it does. It says if you're going to create an urban ag zone, here's what you should like a comprehensive, list of all the things it should include is like what's allowed, how is it allowed, those kinds of things, structures, vegetation height, fencing, water access. So I think that's a good way to transition over into Tobias's discussion of what you presented on, and then sort of the situation in Newark. So and then we'll have some longer discussion. I have some questions as well. So Tobias, if you're able, you should be able to unmute yourself. But yeah, you got it. Okay. So just like anything you want to.
Well, I mean, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this discussion. Thank you, Liz, for your presentation and the work you've been doing and continue to do. And we just have to understand that New Jersey is not New York City, right? So New Jersey is a state that is made up of many different municipalities. And so what works in Newark may not be even thought of to even exist in the next town over. And so that presents a whole list of challenges in itself, but also not every municipality has access to land, as for instance, Newark does at the time being, which the land is continuously and rapidly being sold off for development. But and so when I talk to people about the city's Adopt a Lot program, I can't ignore the historical reference of the city's Adopt a Lot program, which people tend to either not know or ignore entirely, because it started someplace. And the city's Adopt a Lot program did not start with the intentions of urban agriculture or urban agriculture development. The city of Newark's Adopt a Lot program started way back when former Mayor Sharp James was in office, and coming out of the 80s, going into the early 90s, his administration had to figure out what to do with the high amount of illegal dumping that was occurring in the city of Newark due to all of the vacant and neglected land space. And so they decided to uh, create and adopt a lot program that allows residents to gain temporary access to city property uh, for the whole purpose of deterring illegal dumping. And residents knew this was a temporary situation. Residents also, because residents was required to take out insurance policies on this land that they were allowed to use, there wasn't a lot of people buying into this. It was a small group of people that was supported by institutions to adopt vacant lots for the purpose of gardening. And I don't even think the term urban agriculture was even used at that time. And so it wasn't until Senator Cory Booker, when he became mayor and introduced the Office of Sustainability, or his administration introduced the Office of Sustainability, did they decide to rebrand the city's Adopt a Lot program to make it focus more on healthy food access and markets. And then they also lifted the burden of having residents take out insurance policies, especially if it wasn't an institution that wanted to adopt a lot. And then there was the annual lease agreement, which I got involved in this program in 2012. And it is, it's a very detailed agreement. It's not just one page. Um, and it tells you what you can and can't do. Um, is and so the major issue that started to come about when I got involved in 2012 with the city's Adopt a Lot program was land tenureship and coupled with access to water, right? And so land tenureship was huge because there were people who would sign an annual lease, and we knew that there was a possibility that we may not have access to the land the following year. But because it gave us access to land and the opportunity to learn about agriculture, and for those who are already engaged in their previous lives with agriculture, gave them opportunity to return to agriculture in some meaningful way. And so it was looked upon as a kind of like a pastime hobby, nothing to take serious, especially for those that were on the outside looking in. And so land tenureship became a huge issue when we started losing access to land in the middle of that signed lease agreement. So I'm one of those persons who lost, a lot in the middle of the peak season due to development and due to lack of communication. And then not being able to have the opportunity to return back to that site the following year became a huge issue, and people started to drop out of the program. And then also from the government's limited support created a lot of frustration to people's continually wanting to engage in the city's Adopt a Lot program, right? And so and so these are all built up tensions over time that cause people to have this distaste towards the city's Adopt a Lot program. And then us growers not fully understanding why municipalities do not see the development of urban agriculture as part of community development. And so there's a huge communication gap that people aren't trying to bridge. So I'm a grower. I'm connected to the land. My position is the government should just give me the land because they see the good I'm doing in the community. So I'm in the municipality perspective, and I am charged with creating more development, economic development within the city, And that economic development comes from either commercial development or housing development. There's no clause, there's no communication, there's no education, nothing about the development of urban agriculture and how that ties into housing development and or commercial development. You know, so these are all of these kind of issues that have kind of snowballed into huge problems, and the opportunity is being missed of how urban agriculture is and can be directly tied into community development and economic development. But when you don't see where urban agriculture fits, and that's why I advocate for a new classification for urban agriculture, which is community green development, because it can provide housing and definitely provide economic development. But we miss the opportunities because we are stuck in our boxes and can't see how we can merge the two.
Tobias, that was very, very helpful context. And I know if other folks from Newark in the chat, feel free to add additional context from your experience. But I have a question about if I'm in Newark and I am not part of the Adopt a Lot program, I have somehow, and maybe this is not happening, so forgive me for not, this is why it's a question, is like if I have a piece of land that I want to turn, I want to engage in agriculture on for the benefit of the community, and maybe I'm also composting and doing what Newark SAS is doing in education and training around agriculture and healthy food access and sustainability and implementing sustainability. Maybe it's a nonprofit, maybe it's not, it doesn't matter in my question, but it's not part of the Adopt a Lot program. That's the important part of the example I'm asking about. It's like, because there is no zoning, so if it were an industrial zone or a residential zone, I mean, it wouldn't matter, right? Because there is no urban ag zone. And I guess so I'll just stop there.
So first of all, zoning comes into place when you're talking about purchasing the land. And that's when zoning comes into place. When it comes to a program, an Adopt a Lot program, the Adopt a Lot program specifically speaks of beautification or gardening. Beautification or gardening. So your beautification could be a flower garden, or, a couple of benches and some flowers and some plants, and that's it. Or, you want to take it a step further and make it just fruit trees. And so
but not like a hoop house and irrigation, because that's a whole other thing.
In the city's Adopt a Lot program lease agreement, you cannot put in permanent infrastructure. That's another challenge, right? And so it has to be able to be broken down in the event that the property is being sold.
Okay.
And so the lack of growers' knowledge is lack of development, not knowing what development means and what that is and what that entails, right? And so you can, as long as the vacant lot is available and the city is willing to lend you that space through the city's Adopt a Lot program, you can grow your tomatoes anywhere in the city. There's nothing preventing you from doing that as long as you follow the lease guidelines, Raised beds has to be above soil if the soil is considered contaminated. No, you can't do commerce within the city's Adopt a Lot program at that site. You can't exchange money for goods or services at the site. That has to be done someplace else, right? So these are all challenges for those who are wanting to become an agriculturalist, those who want to become a serious commercial farmer. How do I expand myself into the world of agriculture as a profession? And so challenges are presented with opportunities because since 2012, when I got involved, you have an organization like ours, North Science and Sustainability, Inc. You have an organization like Urban Agriculture Cooperative, who have kind of transcended from this community-led initiative to creating career opportunities, employment opportunities, and demonstrating how urban agriculture directly ties into community development and also economic development.
Okay. I want to give Liz a an opportunity rather, and anyone else an opportunity to, respond to anything that Tobias raised, if you're interested, Liz, and then open it up. And I have some, and as well as Stephanie and Anna before we pivot to the whole group. And then I have some questions for both Liz and Tobias
Yeah.
following that. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, Tobias, thank you for sharing your specific experience in Newark. I also just want to like name and acknowledge that sort of my personal read on a lot of the policymaking in this space is, there's a sort of attempt to evolve away from using these tools of zoning and land use control, which have been used traditionally as like a way of policing communities through things like policies like code enforcement policies. And so a lot of the trust gap that you're talking about, Tobias, is also derived from, city governments kind of turning around and saying like, hey, I know that we've been policing you or telling you what you can and can't do, and now we're trying to like help you out. And so by letting you do this thing that you would want to, you would or are already doing anyway. And a lot of that is based in systemic racism and lots of other phenomena. So I could go down a long a long tirade about that stuff, but I think that's like a really complicated like element of all of this policy making, is that it's a lot of kind of like cities kind of turning around and trying to be friendly in places where they have for a long time been actively unfriendly, to put it euphemistically. I think also just kind of like pulling apart a few of the things that you're saying, like you're touching on a lot of different areas of city policy making. So in terms of like how we think of and categorize urban agriculture as a part, and I agree with you, it can be a really important driver of community and economic development. And that's sort of a city planning problem or question, which is like, how do we, and you see this like cities, all the cities that have some kind of urban ag director or urban ag office, it like falls into a different department within the city. Like some cities have their urban ag director under the mayor's office or working with the sustainability office or the parks and rec office. Like no one city has, like no cities have wildly different ideas of kind of what urban agriculture is good for. And not many cities, aside from maybe Detroit and maybe Atlanta, like think of urban agriculture really as an economic driver for the city or a way of generating economic activity, including things like workforce development, as you alluded to. So that's one thing, which is kind of like a city planning thing. The tenure problem is another problem that's really common in a lot of places. Cities, as you said, don't want to think about urban agriculture as like a permanent use. They want to think of it as a way of, or sort of like taking up space on a lot that's otherwise not being used until an apartment building can move in, or until I don't know, some imaginary like multi-use retail on the bottom luxury condo building can move in. And there are a few cities that have approached that differently. Detroit, again, is a city that just sells lots for cheap to residents instead of doing these kind of like short-term leases. So you can buy up to 8 city lots a year, I think, at like $250 a pop in the city of Detroit. They obviously have a ton of vacant land, so they can do that without too much concern, I guess, in terms of losing out on other development opportunities. But I think it's something that more cities should consider.
And Liz, I think that's relevant for other cities in New Jersey that are not Newark, like maybe Camden or maybe even Trenton. I'm not sure. I don't want to speak out of turn, and I don't think anyone from Trenton is in the chat as far as I could tell. But I know there's at least one person from the Camden area. So I mean, I think it's like Tobias said at the top. It's like different things for different municipalities have different challenges in the urban ag space.
But sorry, just to close that thought out, what other cities are starting to do, Richmond, I think, is the one that I'm thinking of right now, is adapt the lease model to a more permanent long-term lease model by protecting the lots that they're leasing long-term for urban agriculture. So it's not necessarily that the same person is going to be doing urban agriculture on those lots long-term, but the lots are permanently protected for urban agriculture, and the city can offer longer-term leases for agriculture on those lots.
And
So
who's
there's
doing that permanent protect? The city itself?
Richmond, Virginia is like working its way towards this. So they've been doing a big mapping project and identifying specific lots in specific neighborhoods that will be sort of protected, like a park is protected, as like a long-term, the designated use of that lot will be our urban agriculture, in perpetuity, and they'll offer longer-term leases on those lots to farmers and gardeners.
Okay. Okay. So if I just want to present the opportunity to anyone else to ask a question before I have some questions that I want to ask both Tobias and Liz. Anyone else have any questions they want to ask Stephanie or Anna? Feel free to unmute. Otherwise, I will jump in. For the next like 10 minutes or so, we'll have a discussion, and then we'll have presentation from Anna and Stephanie on their New Jersey Urban Ag Policy Project. Okay, so my question, and maybe Liz, if you wouldn't mind sharing your slides again, if it's not too much trouble, and then if the slide you have on like the Philadelphia Urban Ag Plan earlier on, and I think there was maybe one other one. Yeah. So, I mean, my question is about this idea of a city creating an urban agriculture plan, and I don't know how many examples, if your research has included, looking at how many cities have created, or even states have created guides like this, like putting out guidance for their municipalities on how to do this, or the city itself creating a plan. And my question is about, to your knowledge, like in practice, who initiates this kind of planning? And or even in theory, from your perspective, what does this process look like in terms of who needs to be involved, who's the catalyst, or who's an ideal catalyst for kicking off this process of saying like thinking of Newark as an example, like we have all this like piecemeal stuff, like Tobias went through the history of like how Adopt-A-Lot even started and how it shifted and transitioned under Cory Booker when he was a mayor, but it's still sort of piecemeal and not really comprehensively addressing the full scope of challenges or needs of urban agriculture. And, the Adopt-A-Lot agreement, like Tobias was saying, has these things that are allowed and these things that aren't allowed, but it's still very piecemeal here and there. And so I guess my question is like, what is the process like for communities coming together and saying, we need a comprehensive urban ag plan, or we need to come together around like our list of needs across these different areas, like zoning, land access, code enforcement, all this stuff. So what does that process look like?
Yeah, great question. To answer an earlier part of your question, so Philly has done this. Dallas has created a comprehensive urban ag plan. New Haven Connecticut is working on one that I'm not sure if they've published yet, but they've been doing a planning process for several years now. I think Atlanta might have a shorter, it's not as comprehensive as Philly's urban ag plan, but it does exist. And the process, Philly is probably the most analogous to what you've described in Newark, in that it came out of a dissatisfaction with the city's approach to land access, actually. The city, there are lots of vacant lots in Philly. The city, and there are lots of folks who had sort of, let's call them informal arrangement, or like informal access to those lots. So lots that had been totally abandoned. There was no owner who was coming around checking on it. And folks just started gardening or farming on those lots. And over time, the city had taken control of some of them through foreclosure or other processes. And so the sort of community set of folks who were growing in these spaces said, we should create a land bank through the city that will then be able to distribute officially, legal title to these parcels to the folks who are growing on them. That process went kind of sideways and didn't end up achieving the goals that the community had established. And so in response to that, they organized again and called for the city to specifically address the concerns of the urban agriculture community through both this planning process as well as by hiring an urban agriculture director. So it was a coalition of community groups, including an organization called Neighborhood Garden Trust, which is a community garden protection nonprofit. The Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, which is like a statewide gardening nonprofit, but they do a lot of work in urban farming. A group called Soil Generation, which is mostly represents the concerns of farmers of color in Philadelphia, and then like just lots of concerned community members who worked in coalition over the course of many years to call for these things and showed up to a lot of city council meetings, a lot of really boring like land bank board meetings, and had a sort of cohesive platform that they were calling for from the city to address all these things. And so they've been able to accomplish a lot of their goals. And there's a person named Ash Richards, who's the urban ag director now, who's charged with carrying out the steps that are outlined in this plan that was generated through that process. And lots and lots and lots of community meetings went into this, I should say, went into the planning process also.
But
They did these sort of like public listening sessions in every different neighborhood. They provided childcare. They provided like, I think, meals in some cases to make sure that folks could really come and show up and be present. They had these meetings in different languages, and really made an effort to incorporate the concerns that they heard in those meetings into the goals that are laid out in the plan.
But the plan itself was written by the city.
It was written by Soil Generation, which is nonprofit, and then it was adopted by the city officially. So city council voted to adopt the plan. So it's now it was like, it was chartered by the city and then adopted by the city.
Chartered by the city. So that's
Yeah.
really what so there's a couple, as like an organizer and program developer, I'm honing in on a few different things you said, right? Like coalition, there's a coalition of groups that are like, we demand the city to create a plan. We demand you to hire someone, like pick a point person that's going to help move this through, sort of make it a priority. Maybe there was a petition involved, there was community organizing involved, and eventually the city chartered, yes, let's develop this report. So those are like some key pieces that I'm hearing, and I'm wondering if like Tobias or anybody else has anything to any other questions that come to mind or comments.
So we just have to be careful about placing demands on certain municipality leaderships. And so, the worst thing you can do is go to a predominantly Black leadership and start making demands, and so because then that could just, trigger so many different things in a person's mind, and so. And so like, I like what Montclair did, and so they don't have an ordinance. But they do have a really nice, well thought out resolution that was, voted on unanimously, which started with an urban ag leader in the community in Montclair that was championed by a council member in Montclair, and that led to this resolution to be developed and then approved on. I mean, and I know resolutions are just that, it's just a nice thing. But it just shows that there is language and ways of getting things accomplished through legislation, through local government, in a reasonable manner, right? And so for me, my stance is, classifying urban agriculture under community green development, which And this is something that couples sustainable agriculture with green technology and permanent infrastructure, because municipalities, if they don't see permanent infrastructure, they're going to say, what is this? What do we talk? You're not even connected to the utilities. Where is the structures that for us to see this as part of development? And so that excludes hoop houses. That excludes, raised beds, because that's not what they see as development, unfortunately. And so we, as agriculturalists, as those that are advocating for the development of urban agriculture, we have to kind of figure out a way of how we can kind of bridge this gap, whereas though we can all compromise on some common language and say, okay, now how do we, now that we have a commonality in our language, how do we move forward from here?
So
I guess,
can I,
yeah,
can
go ahead.
I can I can I ask a question? I hear what you're saying about like showing up just with like a list of demands, but I think that I wonder how possible it feels to make that process feel more collaborative. Like it doesn't necessarily need to be you show up at a city council meeting and you say like, here's our 10-point plan, you need to adopt it now. You can have meetings with council members that represent specific wards where there's a lot of urban farming or whatever, and sort of get them bought into the idea, and they can help shepherd it through a city council process, for example. So I do think that there are more sort of collaborative ways of just kind of like political maneuvering, depending on the context of your city. I mean, I have a friend who has a group in East Cleveland, which is its own little weird suburb of Cleveland that's like the city government is just like actively hostile to basically anyone showing up and asking for anything. So I know that like depending on the city, that process can feel more or less possible. But in a city like Newark, maybe it's just a matter of sort of getting some city council members on board with your goals and building them into that coalition.
Yeah, for sure. I was thinking more along the lines of like coalition building around the idea of approaching someone, a council member, whoever, about creating a plan. So not just like a specific thing, changing the adopt a lot agreement or something like, but actually coalition building around requesting or engaging the city, collaborating with the city to initiate a more comprehensive urban ag plan. I don't know if that helps clarify, but I agree that it would have to be just like the example you gave in Philly was that it was chartered by the city, meaning they were on board from the beginning. It seems to me that the continuation of a piecemeal approach is not the answer, at least from my vantage point, not being actively urban farming in any of these cities, but this really struck me as something that seems like it could benefit of creating an urban ag plan. And so just curious what others think. I know John Compton from Camden is participating, and others from Newark. And so on this idea of like engaging the city and advocating with through a coalition for there to be a comprehensive approach like this. Anyway, that's
And
something that
when I hear people talk about urban ag zoning, I get completely thrown off by that language, because as a person who has transitioned out of the city's Adopt a Lot program into from leasing city land to purchasing the land and now redeveloping it to how I defined community green development. Um, because I don't know what that means by zoning urban ag, because I know there's only two classifications of developments: housing or commercial. And then if you're urban agriculture, you're going into commercial, and so I mean, dispensaries, that's a totally different topic. I understand why that needs to be zoned. I don't understand why a fruit tree or some tomatoes have to be specifically zoned for a particular area location.
Liz, do you want to take that one?
I lost the mute button. Yeah, I mean, I think your example, like fruit trees and tomatoes, I think are probably the least likely thing to need to be zoned. Like I think that I mean, I would have to take a look at what the Newark zoning ordinance is, but a lot of cities say, you know, like that kind of vegetable gardening is allowed pretty much anywhere. It might even, you know, tomatoes might be zoned already in Newark. But it's those uses like you're talking about, like selling things off of a lot. Like if you want to have a little farm stand or even a CSA share pickup, something like that. Things that might generate like traffic or noise or smell, all those kinds of uses. So that's animals, that's compost, um, that's sales,
Shed, the shed
that's
or the,
yeah, like
Right.
all that stuff is already you know, in some way comprehended by the zoning ordinance probably. And so
Yes.
it's just a matter of specifically saying, you know, in these zoning districts, if someone is, you know, doing these agricultural practices, those are explicitly allowed under the
I
zoning code.
understand.
Yeah,
So you're right. So in Newark,
yeah,
it's zoned as commercial.
yeah,
I am in a commercial zone where we are establishing an agricultural hub center, and so yes, I hear you.
yeah.
Okay, so thank you for that conversation. I would like to turn it over to Anna and then Stephanie. And Stephanie, I believe you're sharing your screen, but Anna, if it's either, you know, whoever wants to, Stephanie, I think you're probably already poised to do that uh, from earlier. So just to talk a little bit about the project that NJFDC has been working on to try to provide guidance for folks. Doing the work like, you know, similar to what, or exactly like what Tobias and Newark Science and Sustainability Inc. has been engaged in, and other organizations, and even, you know, to provide guidance for folks who have not yet engaged in this space but are interested in doing so. And so I'll turn it over to Anna, just to give a quick overview of what she's been up to as one part of like a two-part project here.
Thank you,
Thanks, Anna.
Janine. Hello, everyone again. So basically, the project that I'm heading is called the Urban Ag Policy Handbook Project. This is a project that's based off of an urban ag handbook that Jefferson County, Colorado Food Policy Council put together. So what they did is they collected like city codes and ordinances from Jefferson County, Colorado, and other cities outside of the county that had to do with urban agriculture. So this project is basically trying to recreate that for New Jersey cities. So we've selected 12 New Jersey cities that we are interested in, and we're looking at their city codes and ordinances that have to do with topics related to urban agriculture. So this is things like simply, you know, urban farm and agriculture regulations and zoning, community garden regulations, things pertaining to livestock, water access, farmers markets, anything that we thought was important to include that's related to urban agriculture. So our first approach to this was to contact cities directly and ask them for information on their city codes and ordinances. However, this proved to be a little inefficient. I did receive some very good feedback from some people in different cities that was very beneficial to the project. However, municipal workers, city planners, they're very busy. So we kind of had to take a new approach in order to kind of speed up the process. So what I've been doing right now is I've been going on the eCode 360 online to look at the city codes and ordinances directly. So that way I can just go through the code myself using like key terms that relate to the topics that we're interested in order to better organize the information. And this has been definitely a lot faster. So far, I've gotten through New Brunswick, Bridgeton, Trenton, Camden, and Patterson. However, I still have to do Newark, Morristown, Atlantic City, City of Orange, West Orange, Hoboken, and Jersey City. So there's still a lot to be done. We're trying to get all the information compiled by the end of the month, so that way we could have the policy booklet out and ready around mid-May. I think this booklet will be a really good resource for people because, as I've come to find, it's not easy to find regulations and ordinances on urban agriculture. So this resource could be a really good really helpful for people to find the specific information that they're interested in, if they're interested in urban farming or starting a community garden or even like adopt a lot programs, which we've talked about. All that information would be there and would be really helpful for just like the general public. So if anyone has any questions for me or is interested in assisting in any kind of capacity, you can reach me at the email on the screen. I'll also put it in the chat. And with that, I'll pass it over to Stephanie to talk about her part of the project.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stephanie. I've been pretty quiet this conversation, but I've really enjoyed hearing from Liz and Tobias and Janine and everybody. So a bit about me. I actually worked on one of those cooperative agreements that Liz also worked on during PhD studies, which I'm taking a pause on right now. So I was working on urban agriculture in Virginia. But now I'm happy to be volunteering with the New Jersey Food Democracy Collaborative and Janine, and on the second part of this handbook that complements Anna's part, where you can kind of learn about what's going on in your city and that policy landscape. But then now this handbook is trying to show the pathway to actually changing zoning or understanding how to apply for an overlay zone or a permit in order to continue your activities. So they're kind of like individual one-pagers, but we also put them together as a handbook, but they're intended to function either way. And so they give an overview of state policy and programs that have historically impacted urban agriculture, things that have left a legacy of like the 5 acres rule or like not being able to include urban agriculture in conservation and recreation activities with the Green Acres program. We go over key terms to know for zoning, the New Jersey municipal zoning structure, which is that done by that like municipal land use law, MLUL. And then the part that I'm still working on, which from hearing this conversation seems like a bit of an uphill battle, is these steps to change zoning or apply for overlay zoning. I'm finding it not like I'm finding the information to be not very transparent online and having a hard time understanding what are these tangible, concrete steps to work towards changing zoning. And in Liz's handbook, she provides like a good overview of starting with that coalition, starting with a definition of urban agriculture, getting people on board, but then trying to get a little New Jersey specific and understand what are the actual steps has been a bit of a challenge. And then we're talking about barriers to zoning, but then we also wanted to include a model ordinance so that once we do have those steps, you can actually have a reference to exactly understand what to include and what makes sense. And yeah, so that's what I'm currently working on, and that's all.
Thank you, Stephanie. And so the idea is, at least for, going back to Anna's piece of this, is that it'll be organized in tables by topic. So for example, like auxiliary structures, right? Like sheds, high tunnels, whatever. It'll list the municipalities that have something in their code or, zones in their city that where you can use, where you can put those kinds of structures on a lot. And it'll direct you to exactly where, the location in that city code where you'd be able to find and read about that, right? So if I'm in Patterson, I could skim the document like just for everything everywhere Patterson shows up, or I can like zoom in on the table that pertains to the topic that I'm interested in. Like I want to put fencing, I want to put a fence around my community garden. Does my city have anything in their code or their zoning or their permitting that speaks to that? So it's organizing it by topic, and then in the appendix you'll be able to just like search for each city and what sort of permitting and zoning that they have. It's unlikely that Anna will get to all 12 of the cities that we targeted before her internship ends, and she's been with us for just about a year now. And but we will be able to pick up, someone will be able to pick up where she left off and make it as comprehensive as possible. So questions or comments about anything that Stephanie or Anna are doing, or anything you'd like to see sort of incorporated into the project? I'd like to hear from that or from you. Curious if like Meredith or Liz or Tobias have any questions or comments about the project that we outlined. I know Meredith's aware of what we've been working on, and I think Meredith, you have even mentioned like knowing Ash Richards or having that contact there in Philly. So I just wonder if there's any. Yeah, Tobias, go ahead. You
No,
wanna
I think it's great. I think it's awesome. I think and please keep me in the loop of its developments and so forth. Anything I can do to contribute, just let me know.
Sure. I mean, we might maybe you and Anna can connect just around looking at code or specifically around the lease agreement for the adopt-a-lot. I think that would be useful to include in there, Anna. Like maybe we have a specific table on cities that have adopt-a-lot programs, and maybe just like link out to like where you can find detailed information about the adopt-a-lot, and maybe just like a bulleted list of like some of the highlights or important things to know about each adopt-a-lot program for the cities that do have them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely, because a lot of the cities that I'm coming across do have like some sort of adopt-a-lot program, so that would be like good to include as well.
Yeah. And I think also like A, this sounds like a great resource, and B, like there's sort of, as Tobias said earlier, there's sort of these three levels. There's like access to land. So it's like, okay, you can access land through an adopt-a-lot program. And then there's a tenure question, which is like, how long do you get to access it for? How secure is that access? And then there's the sort of zoning and land use control level, which is okay, you've got access, you understand how long you can be there. What can you actually do on that specific lot, if that's helpful? And I'm happy to follow up also. We can talk.
I think that was a very good way. I know personally, I will be zooming back to this part of the recording to capture what Liz just said, because I think you really framed it out well, like the process. It's like access, tenure, and then what can you do on it? So maybe framing the guide, like, or even just in the intro, talking about those being like three separate, but obviously completely connected, or yeah, interconnected, but also semi-separate things to consider, right? And I, for one, am very interested in getting my hands on that Philadelphia urban agriculture plan. And it might be maybe in a future webinar, we will have folks who are part of that coalition building and part of the process to engage city government. Maybe we have a separate conversation or a webinar with them where they can talk a little bit about what that looks like and maybe some of their lessons learned or any advice they can give to cities, to community organizations in New Jersey cities that are interested in potentially taking on a similar process. There's always more work to be done. Every time we have a topic, there's always spin-offs, and that's good. So we have 3 minutes left. Does anyone have any questions or comments, closing remarks? Otherwise, we'll get this trimmed up and added onto our YouTube channel, and we'll circulate it to everybody who registered so that they have an opportunity to watch it again. Liz, do you have any last comments, or do you want to put, I copied the document from the Center for Ag and Food Systems in the chat, but anything else you want to share in terms of like what you're working on or how your project's what are the next steps for the USDA project that you're working on?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's been great to be here and to meet you, Tobias, and be in conversation with you all. And as I said in the chat, I'd just like to encourage anyone who has follow-up questions or wants specific questions even about, stuff, I'd be happy to help with tracking down some model ordinances that might be helpful, for example. Yeah, keep an eye out. Janine, we'll make sure that you're on our outreach list once we start publishing things, and hopefully you can pass along to this group. But yeah, keep an eye out this summer for some of these longer form resources that will start rolling out from this project.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you everybody, and thanks to our speakers and presenters, and I hope everyone has a good afternoon.
Thank you. Take care. Peace.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.